A Mother's Hunting Trip, written by Brian Shinomiya, narrated by Jasmine Bartlett. As the first subtle rays of sunlight filtered through the canvas of her tent, Radha stirred from her slumber. She was on a thrilling 2-week hunting expedition in the rugged wilderness of Montana, surrounded by towering mountains and dense forests. The crisp morning air filled her lungs as she stretched her limbs and prepared for another day of adventure. Radha, an avid adventurer, and her supportive husband came to an agreement that she would be able to embark on a thrilling hunting expedition at least once every year. This was her second hunting trip, miles away from her new home in South Carolina. As a tomboy, she relished the sensation of the smooth and cool nylon sleeping bag enveloping her skin, creating a comforting cocoon that made her feel safe and at ease. To her, it felt better than silk sheets. Nature always felt more comfortable to her when compared to city life. She wasn't used to being around crowds, let alone having to interact with them. The bustling of bodies and scattered trash on the streets or being engulfed by giant skyscrapers wasn't alluring to her. The forest, however, was bliss. When the sun rose in the morning, the sweet melodies of birds chirping filled the air, creating a peaceful and serene atmosphere. And as the night fell on a warm summer evening, the rhythmic chirping of crickets could be heard, providing a soothing lullaby that gently carried you off to sleep. That's what she longed for and missed. Everything outside of that peaceful slumber was out of her comfort zone. She had been in the United States for over a year now. Her life took an unexpected twist when she met her husband in person, quickly becoming a mother and a wife. When they connected online, long before meeting in person, Radha couldn't help but feel a twinge of uncertainty based on her experience dating men. In an age where deception is rampant, meeting someone online can be risky. However, as they continued to converse, she found herself at ease. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, and she felt safe sharing her thoughts and feelings with Tom. Despite the initial hesitation, Radha's certainty grew stronger with each passing day. When Tom flew to Australia to meet Radha, her excitement weighed much greater than hesitation. At the time, she was 19 and he was 29. Radha felt a sense of relief upon meeting Tom, a kind and considerate man she had been hoping to meet for some time. They immediately connected on a deep romantic level. Automatically, they were both smitten with each other. But Radha never saw herself getting married or even having children. Regardless of this, their bond continued to grow stronger. With time, those heavy life decisions became effortless to face and almost inevitable to discuss. Radha couldn't stop thinking about her past as she dressed for the day. The more she pondered about memories, the more she realized that before meeting Tom and coming to the United States, she had no idea what she wanted to do in life. She was, after all, a desert rat from a small desert town far outside of Darwin. She barely got internet service where she grew up, but coming to the United States on a 6-month work visa to live with Tom, she was exposed to a completely new world. A world filled with vibrancy, discovering a multitude of noisy nightclubs, each with its own unique atmosphere and energy. Also surrounded by hundreds of restaurants, most offering a diverse range of cuisine to tantalize anyone's taste buds. With no shortage of nightlife, Radha was naturally overwhelmed. There were so many things for a 19-year-old girl to do on the weekends. And while Tom wasn't the overbearing boyfriend and genuinely trusted her, Radha's excitement was short-lived. She realized she was pregnant less than 1 month after arriving in the US. Radha sighed from the memory, feeling embarrassed as she unzipped the tent's flaps and grabbed her rifle. She could still remember the insults and names she threw at Tom during her stages of morning sickness. He had held her hair out of her face as she faced the wrath of nausea. The mere thought of it all gives her a particular feeling of melancholy and beauty. With the ability to give birth and the unconditional love it brings parallel with the unfortunate loss of youth, Radha naturally carried conflicting feelings. At the time, Radha was feeling despondent and disheartened. She felt that her life had come to a standstill because she was unable to flourish in her independence. Venturing out to bars or nightclubs, she expressed her frustration by venting about her situation and how it was affecting her, being that she was only 19, 2 years too young to even drink in the US. Tom just sat there and took the wrath until it eventually stopped. After one of her tangents, he simply asked her to marry him while cooking a batch of buttermilk pancakes. It was daunting for Radha, being pregnant without prior experience. On top of that, Tom was Radha's first proper boyfriend and now husband. At that age, she held such fear thinking about a child. She was paranoid at the thought of whether or not she would make a good mother. Is this child going to be happy with her? How will they handle parenthood? The more she thought about it, the more anxious she became. Overthinking was present daily as she struggled to come up with the right answers. There was no doubt in her mind that Tom was a fantastic guy. At the same time, she knew just how much he loved her. Not a single day did Radha's feelings go unnoticed, let alone uncared for. Tom was persistent in the way he nurtured her needs. Any time she had a tummy ache from morning sickness or even motion sickness, he'd handle all the responsibilities. She knew he'd make a fantastic father, yet something inside her didn't give her peace. Being so young and pregnant meant that her life had to be put on pause for the next 18 years. Hell, even more, depending on her child's needs. Radha felt as if she was going to become a stay-at-home prisoner. While she wasn't necessarily in a prison cell, the responsibility of taking care of a child prevented her from pursuing any impromptu plans that she had always wanted to do. From feeding and changing the baby to putting them to sleep, every aspect of childcare required her constant attention and dedication, leaving her with little time or energy for anything else. As a result, she had to forego the thrill of spontaneous adventures and settle for a more structured routine. The darkness of night sky was quickly dissipating as the first rays of dawn began to emerge. Radha stood still, taking in the serene view before her. The stars, still visible, twinkled like tiny diamonds, as if they were bidding her goodbye before the sun took over the sky. A deep breath filled her lungs with the crisp morning air, and she felt a sense of calmness washing over her. Radha quickly made breakfast by opening a camping meal pack, pouring water into the pack, and putting in the heating element. The water hissed and bubbled as the heating element warmed up. Listening to it crackle warmed her soul. She was finally in her element. Radha smiled, feeling elated to be free to pursue her thoughts and actions without any restrictions. The heat simmered as Radha continued to ponder away. Lately, she has been lost in her daydreams for extended periods, with no sense of the passing time. The vividness of her imagination has been captivating, leading her to wander off into her world without realizing it. Back at home, Tom and she had agreed to divide the chores around their house. Tom took care of the outside chores while Radha handled the ones inside. Tom cooked breakfast, knowing he could cook the hell out of breakfast. With a large plate of scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, sausage and pancakes, Radha always looked forward to his morning grand slam. Luckily, Tom's parents sold him their rental upon hearing they were going to be grandparents. Once they moved into their 3-bedroom house, Radha switched jobs. Her overall mood improved with the movement. The girls at Radha's previous job constantly tried to create a rift between her and Tom. From trying to get Radha to go to clubs with another guy to gossiping about all of Tom's shortcomings. All this did was drive Radha closer to Tom, given how well he treated her and just how much he genuinely loved her. Granted, she wanted to experience life and venture out, but not the way most young women did. It seemed that all they wanted was to be careless and wild. If freedom meant cheating, getting blackout drunk, and having a one-night stand with the nearest guy, Radha still wasn't interested in it. She believed that Tom was such a sweetheart. The way other girls treated their boyfriends truly ticked her off. They boasted about cheating, while Radha couldn't even imagine playfully making fun of Tom, let alone cheating on him. Another thing that confused her about her new life was the people and their lack of empathy. They were apathetic, as if they had millions of lives to spare, tossing their years away like it was nothing. Radha surely didn't want that, given that she wanted to experience all the new and exciting activities that invaded her life. Risking it all in that fashion was out of the question. Radha sat on the damp ground, opening the food pack of maple oatmeal. She struggled to stay awake. From working nights for the past year, she wasn't used to waking up so early. She couldn't complain, being that stocking shelves at Walmart was the perfect job for a girl in her early 20s. As soon as the store closed, her earbuds went in and the night flew by. The pay sucked, but Tom got promoted to assistant supervisor. She didn't view her marriage as her and Tom needing each other to survive, but their son Devon needed both of them equally. Radha grudgingly finished her breakfast with some dull coffee, wishing she had packed her beloved sugary energy drinks. As the sky began to lighten, Radha grabbed her rifle, a Kalashnikov with a stock that folded under. She named it Lullaby. Tom was into target shooting, but he wasn't necessarily interested in hunting. He found the nature of killing animals particularly difficult, the compassionate man he was. Radha, on the other hand, didn't exactly feel the same way. A rush of adrenaline would spike her heart whenever she'd spot an elk in the distance, just waiting to be supper. While she tried to keep up with cleaning Wallaby, like oiling up the rifle and brushing away the debris, she didn't always get into it as much as she had hoped for. Let's just say she was a terrible mother to Wallaby. The poor rifle sported hundreds of dents, dings, and scratches, and the wood portion on the gunstock had chipped away from her clumsiness of dropping and knocking it over. The upper handguard over the gas tube was even cracked too. She replaced the original lower handguard with a different one, sporting a dong she had cut down to a shark fin for comfort, along with a 3-chamber muzzle brake to help with accuracy. While she had neglected the piece of machinery, she sure knew how to customize it appropriately. On her hike to the camping spot, she accidentally slipped while crossing a creek. She twisted and fell, landing on her back and on poor Wallaby, fatally bearing her weight per usual. Finally, having had enough abuse, the upper handguard broke in half. She had to perform a quick surgery on him, being that it was an emergency, by crafting a new handguard from an empty first aid tin. She carefully loaded a 10-round magazine, folded the stock, and glanced down the scope to make sure it wasn't cracked. Slinging Wallaby over her shoulder, Radha grabbed a flashlight and left her campsite. She began her day by waiting for a deer to find her. As the sun slowly began to rise, casting a warm golden light across the forest, Radha took her first steps through the luscious trail. The fresh scent of pine and earth filled her nostrils, and the gentle rustling of leaves under her feet was the only sound that broke the peaceful silence. As Radha walked deeper into the woods, the beauty that surrounded her was almost overwhelming, from the intricate patterns of sunlight filtering through the trees, to the vibrant colors of wildflowers and the symphony of birdsong that filled the air. It was as if she had entered a whole new world. Every step Radha took was a new adventure, a new discovery, and she was filled with a sense of wonder and reverence for the natural world around her. There was an exact moment when the sky was just orange enough to light everything it touched. The gentle warmth of the morning sun was beautiful to experience. A part of her was sad that Tom wasn't by her. He would have loved the scenery of tall trees and hidden forest paths. Radha felt at ease knowing that no one else was around or anywhere near for that matter. She was alone with her thoughts, which in her mind was both beneficial and bad. she tended to question a lot of things and circle through thoughts like a racehorse on a track. As she walked, consumed by her worries, she was suddenly overwhelmed by a sense of peace and contentment. At that moment, it felt as though all of her concerns and fears had dissipated, leaving her with a feeling of pure joy. Her unwavering belief was that Tom and Devon were the shining beacons that illuminated her life with joy, hope, and purpose. Radha smiled as the gentle rays of sunshine showered her face. With the cool breeze carrying a pure scent, Mother Nature revealed her true character, ruthless yet breathtaking. Before coming to the US, Radha had never held a rifle before. Since Tom loved to target shoot, he introduced her to the practice. She quickly picked it up and developed a liking for it. The Kalashnikov in particular was the perfect do-all gun for a rugged and reliable Australian girl like her. With various capacity magazines, 10 rounds for hunting, and more than she'd ever need. She did, however, have a 75-round drum for days at the range. Whenever she got around to it, Radha found that cleaning her rifle was a relaxing task. Devon would sleep next to her while she quietly polished it. It was peaceful for Radha to watch him dream as she did her thing. In a way, she wondered what their son would say when he realized his mum loved to hunt. Would he go with her, or would he grow up to be like his dad? She replayed these intriguing scenarios in her head, making her feel wholesome and excited. She used high-temperature grade lube to maintain it. She had some left from her true passion, working on her 2010 Ford Ranger. It was a 2-wheel drive, but she did her best to make it look like her old 2009 Ford Ranger in Australia. That one was her favourite off-riding truck, from a push bar on the front, lifted, and plenty of lights to light up a whole town. She missed the old thing. She stopped working on her truck when the neighbours pestered her to work on their cars. Everyone Radha met thought she was a tomboy through and through, but deep down inside, she desired some femininity. She felt glad that Tom connected with her on an emotional level, and at times she could take off the tomboy cloak and hang it in the coat closet next to the front door. Embracing her personality felt liberating, and wearing a mask almost all the time was exhausting and emotionally draining. While it was easier than having to explain at the same time, not choosing to explore other parts of herself was isolating and extremely challenging to navigate through life. She wanted someone to know her on a deeper level. She wanted someone who could offer a sense of belonging and acceptance, and who could provide her with the support she needed during difficult times. It's why she fell so hard for Tom. He accepted and understood her completely. He wanted to know more about her as a person. Granted, he adored her body, but there was so much more to their relationship than intimacy. Tom, the good man he was, believed that no one should ever live like an outcast. Even though Radha would never show it, loneliness would eat her up on the inside. She developed a dark, gaping hole of dissatisfaction as she had no one to lean on. During that period, she often felt scared and unnatural. The unsettling experience kept her up at night, but eventually, Tom helped her through it by accepting her for who she was, no questions asked. At heart, Radha was a quirky, bratty, goofball kind of girl. Even though she pretended to hate Tom's favourite date night of cuddling on the couch and watching crappy sci-fi TV channel movies, she loved it. She shared almost all of Tom's hobbies, which was a blessing and a curse. They spent so much time together that they often annoyed each other. However, they were both relieved that Tom didn't care about hunting, which gave them a chance to take a break from each other at least once a year. Radha made her way down a narrow dirt trail, surrounded by lush foliage and towering trees. The gentle sound of running water grew louder as she approached a glistening stream that cut through the landscape. She carefully stepped over the rocky path that led across the water, taking in the serene beauty of her surroundings. Even though she was on a 2,500 archer hunting ranch, she still wore her puffy orange vest over Tom's desert jacket with camouflage print. As she walked past the trees, twigs gently scratched against Radha's vest. The early morning breeze rustled the leaves, and it sent a shiver down her spine. Mother Nature was sending its regards, reminding her who was in charge. She smiled to herself, feeling as free as a bird. Without any rules or regulations, it was up to her to choose whichever direction. Fortunately, tracking was one of Radha's favourite parts about hunting. The ability to get into the mind of her prey felt exhilarating. As she strolled through the wilderness, taking in the beauty of nature around her, her senses were on high alert. At any given moment, she could switch from leisurely walking to a focused state of mind, observing and analysing the tracks around her. With a keen eye for detail, she would determine their age by closely examining their footprints. This curious and intuitive approach allowed her to gain a deeper understanding of the wildlife she encountered and the world in which she lived. Tracking relied on various factors such as smells, scents, and behaviours. Radha knew all about it. It brought her joy to have something that was solely hers, even when Tom wasn't present. She loved him to death, but this was hers. Her way to vent, to let go of all the worries and enjoy herself. There was no place like nature. As she ventured further into the unfamiliar woods, the scent of fresh pine trees grew stronger, filling her lungs with their crisp, invigorating aroma. She couldn't help but pause for a moment, taking it all in and feeling a sense of awe at the beauty of nature surrounding her. In all that beauty, her inner child was alive. There is a certain inexplicable magic to being free from the burden of care. It's a feeling of being completely unburdened by the future and feeling safe in the unknown. The forest was her sanctuary, a place where she felt free and alive. Every moment spent amidst the lush greenery brought her unconditional love and peace. The woods were still dark, but through the opening in the treetops, Radha could see the sky was turning a mix of purple with a kiss of fiery orange. There wasn't a sound to be heard as Radha made her way deeper into the woods. Not a sound except for her light footsteps. The soft sounds of crunching dirt and leaves, with the occasional snap of a twig. Radha strained her ears, listening for whatever was out there. A branch shook, and she could hear the subtle bubbles and gurgling of the stream as the cold water lazily flowed along. She decided to stop and take a break for a moment. Appreciating little details of nature always made her feel better. She looked at her reflection in the water, sending herself into a whirlpool of thoughts and feelings. Was Devon going to be like her when he grew up? She felt that having such immense responsibility was scary. Reflecting, she remembered voicing her concerns to Tom. Being the sweetheart he was, he reassured her that she would be a great mum. Besides anything she needed, he provided. Their pay combined was nothing to write home about, but it was enough to support their little family. Tom promised his partner that he would take on another job if they ever had financial difficulties because their family's well-being was his top priority. At times, Radha would get anxious about the future. She was no stranger to panic attacks as her thoughts chipped away at her. Whenever she felt overwhelmed and her breathing became uneven, Tom would hold her tightly until time stood still and everything else faded away. She'd feel safe and cared for like never before. Tom's arms were her home, and she never wanted to leave them. Having a child with him made him even more special. It felt as if their bond had grown to another level. Sometimes she wanted her freedom, but taking care of a child together was more precious than any other activity. As she watched Tom interact with Devon, playing with him at every opportunity, she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude and relief wash over her. The way Tom's face lit up as he smiled at their son made her heart swell with pride and contentment, as though everything was going to be all right. Inexperienced or not, she was dead set on being the best damn mum in the world. She was gonna outperform all the other mothers, no matter how tough it got. Secretly, she hoped Devon would grow up to be a hunter like her. He and she could have trips together, leaving Tom back at home. Hell, they could even mock him for not going with them. Radha felt a flutter in her stomach as she realized how much she cherished the life she had. She finally felt safe and secure after a long time. She believed that things were only going to get better in the future. One day her son is going to be old enough to go visit Australia with her. If he ends up liking trucks, she could also teach him how to fix them up. It was a world of possibilities Radha was impatient to experience. "You really are something else," Radha whispered to herself as the water slowly streamed by. A smile spread across her face as she decided to move forward. She didn't typically get lost in thought, but she chose to embrace it instead of fearing it. She slid her rifle under her arm and slowly pulled the charge handle back, racking the bolt and clambering around. She waited to see if a deer would emerge from the dark woods. She was hoping to get a buck on this trip. On her first ever hunting trip, she took a hacksaw to at least retrieve the antlers. Tom mocked her for being too overconfident. When she got home, she took the antlers from the 12-pointer she banged out of the bed of her truck, and as persuasively as she could, she shook her hips and said, "Who's overconfident now?" She spent a fortune having the meat processed and hide tanned. She loved deer meat. The hide was lining Devon's crib while the antlers were mounted over her dresser as a constant insult to Tom for doubting her capabilities. She stood on the trail, waiting and listening, but she heard nor saw anything. Radha slid Wallaby back under her arm and started walking again. She wanted to come across a large buck. Radha was craving a variety of dishes, such as deer burger, shank roast with buttery mashed potatoes, soup, or ribs. Having fresh deer meat was nothing like she'd ever tasted. She could explain for hours that the meat was fantastic, but the fact that she hunted it herself was what made it extra sweet. The satisfaction of a clean kill was addicting, so much so that she always looked forward to the next hunting trip. Radha was only allowed to get 2 deer on one hunting trip. If she didn't get anything on this trip, the fee for processing the meat and tanning the hide would be refunded. As she walked, the metal clips made a soft clink against the sling mount on the lower handguard retainer on Wallaby. She felt like a guerrilla soldier, pushing through the branches and slipping between the trees. It was only a matter of time before she'd stumble upon a potential target. Bringing home meat for the family would fill her soul up as much as Tom and Devon did. Tom would make a pretend fuss about having to help prep the meat and cut everything, and she knew it. They would always go back and forth on so many topics, having their little arguments only to laugh them off a second later. Tom was particularly squeamish about blood, hating that he had to get dirty to make a fine meal. Radha found that hilarious about Tom, so she continued bullying him despite his protests. Seeing him close his eyes in disgust at the slightest sign of blood was amusing for Radha to witness. Sometimes Radha would leave the meat extra bloody only to see how Tom would react. It was their little game of tease, and she couldn't get enough of it. Radha noticed an opening in the trees that lay ahead of her. She quickly secured Wallaby under her arm and hoped to spot a 12-pointer or at least a 10-pointer grazing in the nearby field. As she approached the opening, she readied her rifle. On the other side of the trees, there was a stream followed by an open field. She rested the barrel of her rifle on a tree branch and looked through the scope. She noticed a doe and a smaller deer next to her. Radha could see white spots on the smaller deer, but still wasn't sure about the white-tailed deer. As a beginner hunter, Radha wasn't entirely confident if the creature in her sights was a fawn, so she made the decision to let it be and turned her attention to the opposite side of the field. There, right on the edge of the tree line, she spotted a buck with only 2 points on its antlers. As she aimed her rifle, she felt her heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath to steady herself and gently put pressure on the trigger. Just as she was about to fire, the buck suddenly darted away and vanished into the dense forest, leaving her with nothing but the sound of rustling leaves and the bitter taste of disappointment in her mouth. The adrenaline before the shot was always intoxicating. Unfortunately, it went away as fast as it came on. Hunting deer was always like a game of cat and mouse. Sometimes the animal would be entirely clueless, and at other times it would prove to be a nightmare to track one, let alone land a kill. A rumble of thunder sounded in the distance. Radha took a moment to scan the field. She learned that perching in a tree was the best idea because if you missed, then you'd be shooting into the ground. However, she didn't want to be stuck in a tree in the rain, especially if it was to start thundering. She looked at the grey clouds in the distance. Bad news. By her calculations, they would be on top of her in less than a couple of hours. It's better to keep moving than to stay in one place for long. In case the weather worsens, she has her trusty waterproof poncho with her. A little rain is not going to ruin one of the few hunting trips she gets to go on. Radha put the safety lever up and folded Wallaby's stock under the receiver. Hoping the storm would change its direction, she left the round chambered but the safety on as she started walking. Soon she found a stony outcropping that overlooked a shallow ravine. While kneeling and observing the ravine, she felt overwhelming gratitude for how far she had come in life as she waited for time to pass.